I'm going to talk about our work of the last 25 years on epithelial barrier theory. I would like to start with this graph. We were worrying why allergic diseases has increased very significantly in the last years, and we were really trying to find theories and find reasons of the increase in allergies, asthma, and also at the same time certain autoimmune diseases were accompanying this increase. In 1819, when John Bostock published the first case, in 1873, Charles Blakely published the first series of 28 cases as hay fever and hay asthma. It took Charles Blakely about 3 years to collect these cases. There was allergic diseases, there was asthma and allergic rhinitis against grass pollen, but the number of cases were not so common. It continued like that until 1960s, with a little bit increase in inner city ragweed and inner city and grass pollen allergy, but the prevalence until 1960s were quite low, most probably less than 1%. And in 1961, we are realizing an increased prevalence of allergic diseases, and these were because of increased hospitalization. And increased hospitalization was realized in Australia, UK, New Zealand, Canada, and USA. And also the disease was demonstrated in soldiers, mainly coming from the inner cities. And in the hospitalizations were also for patients coming from the inner cities, and there was not a big problem in the countryside. Then we come to the merger of the East and West Germany. At the time of merger, the prevalence from 1960s to 89, the prevalence in West Germany increased to around 10%, but East Germany was still 1.5%. And this 1.5% prevalence of asthma increased to around 10% within 10 years after the merger of Germany. So this was around 2000. Now we come to today, and we can talk about a certain reason of this 1960 start in a very strong inner city start in mainly UK, New Zealand, Australia, USA, and Canada. We can link this to detergents, mainly addition of sodium lauryl sulfate and many detergent enzymes within the first 4 years. And this detergent was very commonly used in these countries, and sodium lauryl sulfate started to be very commonly used in these countries. And we see the first peak here is about increased prevalence of allergic, autoimmune, and metabolic conditions in industrialized countries. Then we are seeing a second peak, and second peak is mainly linked to additives and emulsifiers in processed food. And this increase was shown in food allergy, anaphylaxis, and this is peanut-induced anaphylaxis, eosinophilic esophagitis, and drug hypersensitivity. Eosinophilic esophagitis was first reported in our institute in 1996, and these cases were hardly collected, and it took some time, but currently we are talking about 40 to 50 million cases. Same for peanut butter-induced anaphylaxis. It was first reported in 2003, and it increased a lot, and peanut allergy became a general public health problem. And food allergy, coming from 1% in 1990s, is now affecting around 10% of the Western population. So chronic non-communicable diseases in 1960s, according to WHO, were about 20-30 million patients. And currently we are talking about 2 billion patients. That means there was a 100 times increase in their prevalence of the chronic non-communicable diseases. That includes allergies, asthma, and many autoimmune diseases, and many also neuropsychiatric diseases. What happened after 1960s to initiate this global health crisis? And we are seeing that after the chemistry revolution in 1950s, there was production of many chemical substances that went to human lives. And the number is around 350,000, and there was no concern on their health effect. And both humans and animals were affected, and about 120,000 of these substances were not appropriately reported even. There is just something is introduced to our lives, but there was written that it's for patenting reasons, we cannot disclose more, and this is a huge number. 120,000 of these chemical substances are still in our life without a certain clear registry that they are affecting and the effect started and the increase in prevalence started. So we are talking about these substances, what they do, and when we are exposed to these substances within exposome, we are seeing that epithelial cells are getting activated, and microbes that are commensals, that are protecting our body, that are part of the epithelial barrier, are also dysregulated, and immune system around the epithelial barriers are affected. And this is making the epithelial barrier theory. The current status of humans, and many maybe also domestic animals, is that their epithelial barriers are not touching each other appropriately, and the microbes are passing through and going deeper in the epithelium. We identified factors in our lab that damage the epithelial cells, that induce release of alarmins, and that induce also epithelial barrier damage. And the first group is cleaning products, laundry and dishwasher detergents, surfactants, sodium dodecyl sulfate, which is also the same material as sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium dodecyl benzene sulfate, shampoos and body cleaners, household cleaners, toothpaste. And the second group is enzymes and emulsifiers in processed food. After around 2000, there was a very major change in eating habits of humans, and packaged food became very strongly into our lives. Packaged food started in 1980s, but after 2000s, it is nowadays very commonly used. And then we have the air pollution group with cigarette smoke, diesel exhaust, ozone, nanoparticles, particulate matter, and microplastic. So the allergens and mites and infectious diseases are there. They were existing for a long time, but these allergens and mites mainly started by mainly the grass pollen allergy, and house dust mite allergy started after house heating, and also lawn making was the main reason for increased grass pollen allergy, is related to high dose of exposure to certain allergens. And then the time is around 1850s when we started to see these diseases as a general disease that are noticed. But the prevalence is mainly related to these toxic substances that are affecting our lives since 1960s very commonly. So what happens is that the epithelial barrier is leaky and the microbiome is passing beneath the epithelium. This we can see when we biopsy the sinuses. We can see when we have asthma biopsies, we can show the transcriptome changes, that there's microbial transcriptome beneath the epithelium. And also in the gut barrier, we can see that this epithelium is leaky and there's bacteria below the epithelium. And all these substances also have a synergistic effect. Just think that a patient who has house dust mite allergy is exposed to high dose of surfactants and laundry material, and at the same time there is microplastic at home, and there is particulate matter at the air, and these are were not happening before 1960s, but nowadays in many patients' homes, this is happening very commonly. And when the epithelial barriers are leaky, allergens, toxins, pollutants, microbiome, and opportunistic pathogens are passing through these barriers. So we identified certain diseases that are linked to epithelial barrier theory, and our selection criteria had 5 major factors. We can see that there is increased prevalence of certain diseases after 1960s or after 2000s, which are not affected with the changing method of diagnosis. When we look at, for example, eosinophilic esophagitis, we started doing in our clinic endoscopies, and when we were assistants and in internal medicine, we were doing gastroscopies. It's the same device. It's hemotoxin eosin staining. Nothing changed after 1980s, but in 1980s there was nothing mentioned about eosinophilic esophagitis, and there was not such disease. But currently we are talking about 40-50 million diseases. The second criteria is epithelial barrier defect. That can be detected by many methods, but mainly can be seen in biopsies. And there is also alarmin release, and the IL-25, IL-33, TSLP, and multiple chemokines are alarmins that are coming from the epithelium, and IL-1 with the activation of the inflammasome is also released. The third criteria is microbial dysbiosis. Microbial dysbiosis is a very major thing that's very important. It's because of loss of commensals and colonization of opportunistic pathogens. And then we can see there's different and practically irrelevant diseases, which is the multimorbidity, comorbidity pandemic. Because when we were assistants, we were seeing these diseases as single entities, and there was some asthma and atopic dermatitis, allergic rhinitis and atopic dermatitis, but currently there's multiple diseases are coming together as multimorbidities. And the last criteria is our group is showing and continuously publishing papers on circulating microinflammation. The first papers was also from us showing that, for example, CLA positive skin homing cells coming from gut and going to skin. So this kind of inflammation was carrying the message of the inflammatory message to target organs. So this paper is open access. You can download it and you can see the details here. And here we have published 68 diseases related to epithelial barrier theory, which just appeared a few months ago. And we have the skin disease group, airway diseases group, digestive tract diseases, neuropsychiatric diseases, and autoimmune, autoinflammatory diseases, a huge group. Ocular diseases and other diseases group. It's important that you have this paper on your desk that you can study which diseases have these criteria, 5 criteria, sometimes 3 of the 5, but they are all showing increased prevalence, and they are showing microbial dysbiosis, epithelial barrier defect, and they are part of the comorbidities of the patients, allergic patients. The second important paper is about One Health concept, that the epithelial barrier dysfunction is happening in companion animals, in the pets in our houses, mainly dogs and cats, and also domestic animals and sheep and cattle. They have epithelial barrier problems, and this paper shows in detail that food additives, pet shampoos, detergents, and genetical factors, air pollution, allergens, micro and nanoplastics are affecting the pets and causing new diseases in the pets. And here we have microplastic exposure of pets and different types of microplastics that pets are exposed. And some of them are renewable, some of them are non-renewable, and they are all are petroleum-based, and there's also bio-based plastic that are being produced. And this is also an interesting table, which is in the paper. You can see the common pet food having so many food emulsifiers, many different food emulsifiers and additives that affect the taste, appearance, texture, and mainly the shelf life of the pet food. And the One Health concept is very important, and we can see in the barrier theory, this One Health concept is coming to front a lot. And here is another paper which appeared also last year. It's coming from our sports scientists, and this sports group has been working on epithelial barrier theory, and this is about nutrition and environmental exposure of athletes is causing problems in the athletes, and the work is going on here. There is a resistance, reduced resistance to infection, and there is intestinal blood flow problems because they have to have over calories, and a professional Olympic athlete needs 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day in a double training day, and these calories are mainly obtained by packaged food, and this is quite damaging. And there is increased respiration. Their inhalation, the respiration time increases by more than 20 times, and there is particulate matter, fine dust, diesel exhaust, toxins, and evaporating chlorine from the swimming pools are inhaled. And there is also increased hygiene conditions with multiple showers, increased use of cleaning products, disinfectants, aggressive detergents are being used in the sports life. Now we have many papers. I would like to take your attention to this one, mainly the epithelial barrier theory website, and also in our journal is continuously publishing good papers on epithelial barrier theory, and also an app that you can download to your phones, and you can check the barcode of any cosmetic or any food in Europe. It works in English, German, and French, and it's a very nice app that you can be sure that there's no toxic product in your food or in your cosmetics. So the detergents and surfactants is a main part of this epithelial barrier theory, and it is most probably the initiator of the very high increase prevalence of the diseases. Sodium lauryl sulfate is the main culprit. It's included in powder detergents in 1960, exactly in 1960, and within 4 years, there was amylase, lipase, and several proteases introduced to detergents. And it can be found 5 to 10% in shampoos. And the bad thing is that it's introduced to toothpaste after 2000 in the range of 3%, and it can be found in cosmetics and skin cleaners. And the worst thing is that the toxicity of sodium lauryl sulfate is very, very high, and it's toxic in 1 to 50,000 times dilution. And we publish several papers, and others publish also several papers. You can see the papers of Hideaki Morita and Alfred Doyle and colleagues from the Mayo Clinic on the effects of sodium lauryl sulfate on EOE, on asthma, and the toxic threshold is 0.002%, but it is used 10%. You can see that how high is the use dose compared to toxicity. So we have some suggestions for patients, and around 30 people are working on these suggestions. And here is use of extra rinse and a small amount of detergent, and the use of liquid detergent instead of powder detergent is suggested. Choose of sodium lauryl sulfate free products. They exist and they can be used. Read ingredient labels. That's very, very important, and that's something that we need to bring to public and to our patients. They have to always check the ingredient list of shampoos, body washes, toothpaste, and other personal care items. It's suggested to use natural and organic products, and limit the use of foaming products because too much foaming is only obtained with a high dose of sodium lauryl sulfate. And it's important to avoid prolonged contact, usually for hair washes and for body washes. We showed that it's unpublished, but 30 seconds is sufficient to break the barrier in high dose of contact to sodium lauryl sulfate. And too much heat together with sodium lauryl sulfate is also damaging the tissues. And then we come to the gastrointestinal system, and this is the shining glasses, and shining glasses are affecting our lives, starting from 2000, shown by Ismail Öğür, and his paper showed the toxic material in these shining glasses. And professional dishwashing was initiated around 2000, and it's 1 to 2 minutes washing at 82 degrees and 4 atmosphere pressure, and there is no rinsing. So the toxic rinse aid is dried, and which is the shining material on the wash material, and it can be extracted. We are putting a medium on the glasses, and we are shaking a few times, and we are getting the toxic material. It's alkyletoxylates, and alkyletoxylates are responsible for toxicity of these professional dishwashers that are being used in our hospitals, armies, schools, and nowadays almost in every restaurant. And the toxic dose is 20,000 times dilution. So there are suggestions to avoid alkyletoxylate toxicity of dishwasher and rinse aid. It's important to choose alkyletoxylate-free products, and do not frequently change plates and glasses. Every time you have new glasses and new plates, you are having more alkyletoxylate. It's suggested to rinse them for patients mainly with water before use, and a very short rinse gets rid of the alkyletoxylate. Limit the use of rinse aids in the professional machines, and read the labels very carefully. It's suggested to use eco-friendly plant-based dishwashing in the environment. And in the household dishwashers, there are dishwashers that have 3 things at once, and the bullet in the middle has alkyletoxylate, and this alkyletoxylate is very toxic in the household, but it is used in very, very high concentrations, and which is not even rinsed away in the public dishwashers that are professional dishwashers. So packaged food is quite important, of course. Packaged food as a concept started again in 1980s, but became very, very common after 2000. Addition of preservatives additives, and texture-making substances to increase the shelf life. In around 2000, the shelf life of many food was about 7 days. And when we were going to supermarkets, they were changing the shelves every 7 days. And they were the sauces, pizzas, and many packaged food. And currently, we are seeing that it's the same pizza, which has a shelf life of 1 year. Same sauce has a shelf life of 1 year. And this is because of addition of additives and antibiotics and also emulsifiers. The aim is to kill fungal growth, bacterial growth, and also provide a thickening effect so that it looks shining and nice, and it doesn't look dirty, because if the pizza leaves the water to the surface under the plastic, and there's both things, plastic exposure, surfactant exposure, and also other additives. The question is it possible to do this without harming human cells? Nowadays, the research is going on. We published several papers, and here are the suggestions to avoid packaged food and food additives and emulsifiers. Read labels carefully. Check ingredient lists for additives and emulsifiers like carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, carrageenan, monosodium glutamate, nitrates, and sulfates, which are commonly used in processed foods. Choose whole foods. Focus on fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and unprocessed proteins to minimize exposure to emulsifiers. Cook at home. Prepare meals from scratch using natural ingredients. These are suggestions to patients, of course. Limit processed foods. Reduce the consumption of snacks, baked goods, and convenience meals that often contain emulsifiers, and opt for natural alternatives. Another important change in our lives, it's becoming very awful and terrifying, is the exposure to micro and nanoplastics. There is so far 9 billion ton plastic produced in the world, and 1 billion ton is remaining as microplastic in the water, earth, and air. And the plastic measurement until 5 years ago was not so sensitive. It was at 1 micrometer and around 1 microgram detection limit. And this detection limit is now reached to a very sensitive detection by the use of atomic force microscopy and infrared spectroscopy. And now it's possible to detect 1 nanogram of plastic. When we started to detect 1 nanogram plastic, then the papers came one after the other. It is found in amniotic fluid, pericardial effusion, coronary artery plaques, and brain, testis, ovary. So plastic is ingested by cells. It is immune modulatory, epithelial barrier opening, and binding to receptors. And plastic pollution is also together with the forever chemicals like PFAS and biphosphonates and also phthalates. And these substances are even more toxic and cancerogenic. So it has a very major effect, major impact. And just keep your eyes open for plastic pollution and the effect of plastic to humanity and also all living species is going to be one of the main concerns of humanity in the next years. Here is an awareness slide collecting the plastic and trash around our house. So here is some suggestions to avoid micro and nanoplastics. Drink filtered water and avoid using PET bottles, because PET bottles were safe until 5 years ago, but nowadays every new measurement shows that PET bottles have plastic in it. And this is polyethylene terephthalate. PET makes it, and it has phthalate in it, and also it's polyethylene. And pay attention to the selection of meat and fish. Use products from large seas, clean seas, and high altitude sources. Avoid skin and organs of seafood. Replace plastic tea bags with loose leaf tea. Avoid plastic containers. Store food in glass or high quality steel containers. Do not use plastic cutting boards, containers, and use steel and glasses in the kitchen. And use and wash less synthetic fabrics. Wash with cold water. Consider microfiber. And use wash less synthetic fabrics. Wash with cold water. Consider microfiber. So our research has shown that epithelial barrier damage has multiple toxicities, and these substances cause oxidative stress, endoplasmic reticulum stress, mitochondrial stress, innate immune response and cell death with different mechanisms like apoptosis and ferroptosis. We are observing microbial dysbiosis and multiple effects of microbial dysbiosis. There is alarmins and multiple chemokines. Just consider that there are some anti-alarmin treatments. Anti-TSLP is in the market nowadays, and anti-IL-33 is being worked. Anti-IL-1 is used for several rheumatoid diseases. There is innate lymphoid cell and dendritic cell activation, and type 2 T and B cell activation and proliferation, eosinophil accumulation and activation, and IgE production happening in these exposures. And here we are seeing the agreement between humanity and the microbiome, and the microbes were developed in the earth about 2 billion years, and eukaryotic cells around 1 billion years. After 1 billion years, they made a decision between the microbes and eukaryotic cells to live together. So this is happening a lot, and what we lost is the diversity of the microbes in our gut. Instead of 4,000 species, which decreased to around 2,000 species, and in the skin, instead of 800 species, which decreased to around 300 species. So this interaction between the prokaryotes and eukaryotes was providing nutrients, vitamins, metabolites, helping the digestion, helping immune education, helping cell differentiation and tissue maturation. And after 1960s, this agreement is broken. That's a big issue for humanity and also domestic animals at the moment. So epithelial barrier damage is taking place, and a lot of microbial dysbiosis is seen, and immune system activation that makes the diseases. So the first thing in the diseases is epithelitis. So when we are exposed to these substances, our epithelial cells are starting to make many substances, and there was a type 2 response, and also the alarm is produced by the epithelial cells, IL-1, IL-25, IL-33, TSLP, and many chemokines. And this was making an alert to invite the immune system in the environment. That's what we are seeing in asthma. That's what we are seeing also in chronic rhinosinusitis. Opportunistic pathogens and colonize in the area of this epithelial barrier defect. And when we see these opportunistic pathogen colonization, we can be almost sure that there is a barrier defect. Staph aureus is number one. We can say that in atopic dermatitis, more than 90%, in chronic rhinosinusitis, more than 90%, in severe asthma, more than 70% have Staph aureus, anti-Staph aureus immune response, and that's is making the inflammation around the tissues. There's also Moraxella, Haemophilus, and pneumococcus. So that's the second step is expulsion response. When these bacteria are going deeper in the tissues, we have to do something to expulse them and to avoid sepsis. So the bacteria that's going deeper should not be accepted there, because this will make a microabscess. The immune system is coming with full speed to throw away these microbes, and at the same time allergens, toxins, and pollutants that are trying to invade the body, that are trying to go deeper. This is together with chronic T and B cell response, as we are seeing in asthma, allergic rhinitis, in chronic rhinosinusitis, atopic dermatitis, eosinophilic esophagitis, and this chronic T and B cell response is taking place. And there is players of in allergic disease like IgE, eosinophilia, open barriers, cough or itch, Th2 cells, B cells, innate lymphoid cells, IL-4, IL-5, IL-13. And at the same time, there is detectable autoimmunity and neuroimmune interaction, which I didn't mention too much in this talk. So we are now coming to the last slide, summarizing here. Exposure to barrier-damaging toxic substances and genetic reasons. Genetic reasons make 1 to 2% of our patients. The rest is related to exposure to barrier-damaging toxic substances. There is microbial dysbiosis and decreased biodiversity taking place with loss of commensals, increased opportunistic pathogens. At the same time, translocation of microbiota to subepithelial areas and immune response to commensals and opportunistic pathogens is taking place, and inflammation in the epithelium starts, and defective epithelial barrier healing and chronicity because of epigenetic regulation. This ends up with 2 billion allergic, autoimmune, and neurodegenerative patients. So in summary, there's 5 things happening. And this is the first one is direct toxicity to epithelium and microbiome. The second one is epithelitis and microbial dysbiosis and production of alarmism. The third one is expulsion response with full inflammation and immune response that makes the diseases that we are observing and circulating microinflammation and then epigenetics and chronicity. So I stop here by thanking our co-workers who have done a great work in this area: Sena, Yostaka, Maria, Duygu, Yağız, Hüseyin, İsmail, Paola, Karina, Bingji, and Manru. And this is our group from this summer. And thank you very much for all the international collaborators. Thank you very much for your attention.